Welcome back to Let's Talk About It with Sons and Daughters. Today I'm your host, Christian, and I am with someone that we are all familiar with, especially myself, my sister-in-law, Juli.
Hi, Christian.
Hello. And, we're going to have a hard time looking at each other.
I know.
If you're watching on video, you'll understand what I mean. But if you're watching on or listening on audio, there's nothing between us, just some metal, what would you call these? Not racks.
Yeah.
Stands.
And a lot
stands.
of love.
A lot of love. It'll outweigh the visual distraction. Well, I'm excited. One, because it's been a while since we've got to do a podcast together.
It has.
A couple months, maybe more.
I think more. But I mean, maybe with Brooke?
The Spill the Tea sis one.
Yeah. Spill the tea isn't even like a thing anymore. So.
Well, you know what? We jumped on that train while it was still chugging along. And now we have to think of a creative title for today's podcast. But I'm excited for today's episode because we are talking around something that doesn't come as a trend. It's something we always deal with, and that's how to trust God.
Yeah.
We did a little poll, if you will, on Instagram and asked what are some things that we need to tackle, some things that we have questions about, whether we just started walking with God or we've been walking with God the majority of our lives. And I know that's Juli, since she was in diapers. She's just like, I got this faith thing down. That's why we're like, can you please enlighten us on this podcast today?
I wish I could say that, but I'm always surprised by how I continue to struggle with the same things and the fundamentals of, Christianity, walking with God, faith being one of the big ones, where there is this, there's just these question marks for me. Like, what does it look like to trust God and to open-handedly offer a surrender on the things I'm believing for, hoping for, and yet steward them well? Like, what does that look like? And how do we do that in this life, in this journey where we know we're not in control, but it is so tempting to try to maneuver things into our grasp.
Right.
And yet I think this is one of those that we'll come back to again and again and take heart in the fact that I think even the greats of our faith continue to work out what that looks like for them in any given situation. The trust.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's even interesting that the Gospels have 4 different accounts. It's like people's perspectives and like your walk and how you even perceive what God is doing in your life.
Yeah.
Like you said, it takes a reckoning to learn how to do. It takes faith muscles to build continually. And that's why I'm excited to jump into it. And I think we kind of start with what you're saying. How do we actively trust God in a way that doesn't feel like, okay, it's hands off, I'm not even going to think about it again, because reality of the fact, we're human. That's honestly not possible for us to kind of have a hands-off mentality. But how do we partner with God in trust?
Yeah, I think that word partner, recognizing he's not looking for us to just be these vessels that are almost like floating by on a conveyor belt, and he's deciding which one he's going to put in each one. He understands the details and the nuances that come with our life and any given day and time and situation that we're walking through and walking into. And that remembering he wants it to be this relationship, because I think of it in my best of times. I think of it in this awareness that God is a lot less concerned with what happens to us than what can happen through us. And the verse in Proverbs about hope, and hope deferred makes a heart grow weary, but hope fulfilled becomes a tree of life. And I love that, because when you think of a tree, it has this root system. And that to me is what the waiting is. It's where your root system is going down and deep, and it is developing in a way that's going to serve you through whatever this situation is currently and into what's to come. And God is so efficient. It's never just about this situation. Right. So to kind of contextualize it and make it real for people, whether it's you're waiting to meet your husband, or you're waiting and hoping to get pregnant, or there's a big move or shift that's coming and you've known it's been coming. And then as it starts to play out, you get these pieces and they're sweet and precious to you, but then you just want more.
Right.
It's like, I want the full picture, God. And God's like, what happened to walking with me, to this daily bread being enough to satisfy today? That we're always wanting more and more. It's like the children of Israel. I feel like I'm really jumping around. But the children of Israel wanting the manna, and how the manna would not last beyond that day. And that speaks to me so deeply of how God knows us. He intrinsically knows us like we were his creation, because we are. He knows the way we're wired and that we will grasp for those things to come. And he's like, oh, you can't handle that. Like, it will rot in your very hands if you try to collect tomorrow's manna.
Right. I mean, it's the whole, you can't handle the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, if God's plans are higher than ours, then it only makes sense that we get fragments and pieces. And even when you're saying that, like, convicted of is even what you're like, going back to the analogy of, say you're waiting to get pregnant. And it's like, that's the dream. Like, that's what we're trusting God for. But then as soon as, the tests happen or the action happens or little glimpses of hope, it's like we start to think, okay, now that I'm walking in this step, I deserve to have the details, or I need to know the footprint of where we're going. But God's like, hey, remember when you just trusted me with what the expectation was?
Yeah.
And you trusted me with the details.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's something that I'm learning of. As soon as the process changes, the outcome doesn't, the trusting doesn't. It's trusting in him, not trusting in what we gain or what we want to see. And huge for me. Not an easy feat.
How capable we are to hold the promise. Like, I think pregnancy is such a beautiful example, because you get that positive test and you're so excited, but then the fear immediately comes at you. Like, what if something happens? What if, you lose this baby, and then you have to tell all the people who you've told that you're pregnant, that you lost it, and all of these what ifs. And I think that becomes so much a part of this trust and faith and waiting journey, is the what ifs. And they in thy kingdom come scenario, they have no place. Like, what does man have to gain by worrying about tomorrow? God is like, this has no place but to steal from you and to steal from the beauty that is the plans of God. Like, I'm sure you have scenarios in your life, Christian, where if you had been given what you thought you wanted, you would have missed out on what God had for you. And then in hindsight, you can see it so clearly. You think, thank you, God, that you didn't give me that what you had was so much better than what I thought I wanted. But it's hard in the day-to-day. Like, what are some things for you? Because I know you have a beautiful story of even like when you were waiting for your husband and praying and hoping and believing. So what were some tangible daily things that you could go to, you could turn to when it just was hard? It just felt kind of impossible in your own strength.
Which, and before I even answer that, I love the way that you position it of, there is this human emotion and expectation that we don't run away from or pretend that isn't there because we want to be good Christians. But it's like, how do we, even when we slump down into that position, bring that back to God, or like reaffirm our minds? And you're so right. I have a lot of moments in hindsight where I'm thankful that either one, in my waiting journey of love, I didn't get what I thought was best. And then two, even that the timing that I thought it should have happened wasn't the right timing, because I'm thankful I did not meet Arden in high school, because we probably wouldn't be married today. We were just both two different people. Yeah. And for me, I don't think it has to be, or I hope this isn't, especially when we do have kids one day, I hope my daughters don't do it the same way I did, but I learned what not to do. I kind of was the more, okay, God, I got this, and then like, I just want you to bless it because I feel good about it. And he was like, oh, baby girl, that's not how it works. Like you're putting what you want to happen and asking for a stamp of approval rather than asking to partner with me. And it just goes back to that partnership. And I remember the season before I met Arden, which is always funny to me. It wasn't a very long one. It wasn't a, kind of children of Israel, like, let me lead you out and we're going to go through the wilderness.
Yeah.
It was kind of like God was saying, I need you to correct this mindset. I need you to put your trust in me. And as soon as I did, he's like, great, look what I can do with that. And I was like, oh, okay, we're going. Yeah, awesome. Let's do it. But it was for me, because I did choose the route of trying to do it in my own strength, for me, it was more of a surrendering and like a dying to self in a sense of, I'm going to be okay with if my timeline does look different. I'm going to be okay with if what I think of is best isn't what's best.
Yeah.
And, now I have, through walking with God, understand what peace is meant for, understand, what the Bible says and believe that that's what's going to come. And I think when you don't have that clarity of what peace looks like, what God has promised you, it's easy to settle for counterfeits.
Yeah.
And just, God never wants that. That's part of why he's like, will you please trust me?
Yeah.
I'm God for a reason. Let me do my job.
And I'll give you my peace. And even like the peace that surpasses understanding, like it doesn't have to, all of your timelines and boxes don't have to get checked and then you'll receive my peace. Like I'll give you peace in the midst of the waiting and the wondering and the hope and the sadness. Like it is hard to believe that you are holding a promise from God and to have talked about it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with talking about it with people and friends and having those who you trust come alongside you. We are called to carry one another's burdens, but it does create this expectation. And it creates an expectation where you're feeling like they're putting an expectation on you and your expectation is on their expectation, which is, it's confusing. And we can allow that to be so much of a guide where we are being guided by our expectations and external expectations as opposed to the peace of God.
Right.
Where that doesn't have to make sense to anyone else because you know that this is what it's supposed to be and what it's meant to be, and that's enough for you. I think that's that place of surrender. Surrender to me is sometimes one of those words that's thrown around in Christianity that it's sometimes hard to nail down. Like, what does that actually mean and what does that actually look like? And I think it changes too for each person in each season. But what has surrender been like for you in those moments of heartache, of confusion, and yeah?
Yeah, I mean, even when you saying that, I think my mind goes to, and maybe this is an extreme, but when Abraham took his son up to be sacrificed, and that's all he knew was God's leading me to this point. I'm sure that was not at all what he had expected for having this child that he'd been longing for and waiting for. And he's like, great, now I have to do this, but I'm going to walk in obedience. And I think when we think of sacrifice, it can be that big, scary thing of like, gosh, I have to lay this desire down at God's feet, and it's just going to be gone. But I don't think God ever takes just to show his authority. Like, you need to lay this down at me because I say so. Yeah. Like kind of that parental.
Or it like makes me feel good to know that I control
like
you.
I'm the boss situation. It's always a give and get. Not that we live from that place of, okay, I'm going to give this to God so I can get something better. But that's his heart. It's always lay this down at me so I can bless it, so I can give you something better, so I can do it in the right time. And for me, that's surrender is trust. And it just all goes back to, one, do I trust God says what he does? Do I trust he is who he says he is? And even with me, like getting my prayer language and things like that, it was such a partnership for me because I was like, God, I believe that you do this. Like, obviously you do this, but I don't trust myself to follow through with what you're leading. And so for me, and again, now I'm going around and around, but for me, sacrifice is, it's obedience. It's just believing and reaffirming even when I feel anxious, even when I feel like tied to something, trusting that God is going to take care of me.
Yeah.
And I think that's, maybe the simplest way we can put it. But I want to know from you, some people asked, how do you deal with disappointment when the timeline does change? When you were sure that person was the one, you were going to get pregnant in the season. What do you do when you get to that point?
That is a good question. And in my own life, I have always, not always, at the best of times, what I have done is just paused, allowed space to dig a little bit deeper into why is this as disappointing as it is? Why does this feel as disappointing, as earth-shattering, because I'm a bit of a dramatic at times, as it does right now? And partnering with Holy Spirit to really go to that place of like, what was it that I was placing? It goes back to expectations. What was I placing on this that I shouldn't have been? And in what way does God want to free me from that? Because it is a burden when you are placing these expectations on things where they just don't belong. And so that for me has been a huge key in moving through disappointment, because I've also done an alternative, which is just put it aside. I was wrong. I was off. As quickly as I can put it to the side so that I do not have to deal with it, because it's already caused me pain over here. I don't want to move it to the forefront and walk through more pain, but that really is the only way through. And that actually, I heard once that the word in the scripture, hope deferred, is not, it's not just something you're hoping for that doesn't happen. It's when you shelf something. So it's like you're hoping and you're believing and you're praying and you're partnering, and then it just doesn't happen. And so you're like, forget it. Like that is too painful for me to continue to hope for. So I have to shelf it. I have to put it aside. And that is what, becomes like a sickness to your bones almost. And in a lot of ways is the root of bitterness, which leads to all types of different issues. So yeah, I think it is moving through the disappointment, not just setting it to the side, because there is something for you on the other side of that. Even if it's not the promise, even if it's not the thing, there is something really good for you when you move through.
Mm-hmm. And, I want to make sure we don't just stay in the negative side of trusting. We want to make sure we end on the promise, the blessing that comes with trusting God. But you touched on, putting things on a shelf that brings bitterness, that brings things in our minds. And I know for some people watching this, they may think just hearing those words like, yep, I remember the situation, I trusted God, or even I trusted a pastor or someone that's supposed to represent God, and I was so let down.
Yeah.
I wonder if we can talk about what effects that can bring, so we are aware of maybe if we can't pinpoint those down to a trust mishandling, that we know how to circle back to, so we can get out of those situations. So, I know some may be walking away from the church, walking away from faith altogether. What's some things that you've seen either in your life or in others' lives that you're like, this happened because of trust and we need to address it?
Yeah. I think it's misplaced so much of the time. Like, we as humans are meant to live in community and walk side by side one another, but we have a tendency, back to the Israelites who demanded a king, and God never intended for them to have a king. He wanted them to be a nation of kings and priests, not looking to a man for what they were only supposed to be getting from God. And so that is what we have in our humanity a tendency to do. And I've seen that in my own life with Addison, because we were so young when we got married, and he was just always so much more mature and spiritual. And
you were 19 and
yes, he was 22, but okay, like going on 55 right, or something. Not physically, thankfully, but spiritually, he's an old soul. And so I would have a tendency to put so much of my hope and trust and expectation on him that really only belonged to God. even now, a decade plus into our marriage, we are still unraveling some of that narrative that early on I clung to him. And I think it's easy to see that in marriage, and it's even easy for it to disguise itself as something good in marriage and in the church and in leadership, because you think, I'm just honoring them. I'm giving them something, like I'm respecting their position, their authority, but that is not good for them, and it's not good for you. And the only thing that leads to is disappointment, is hurt, is frustration, is confusion. But again, this is an opportunity where you can see, I gave them something that only belonged to God. Whether it's your spouse or your parents or your pastors or a teacher or a coach, where you put a hope in them that man was never meant to carry our hope. Our hope belongs to God.
Right.
And so it becomes this opportunity, but you have to bring it out, because anything that you keep isolated, just, it's like a stagnant pool of water where it just starts to develop really gross, moldy.
You get the visual, guys.
Yeah, like it just gets disgusting because it's kept isolated in the cold and the dark. You have to bring it into the light. And sometimes, a lot of times, a way to kind of speed up that process would be like professional counseling or a Christian counselor or someone who you can speak openly with. It's not necessarily the person or the organization, the institution who this was in conflict with. Not to say that opportunity will never come, but initially it has to be done in safety, because safety is where it'll continue to be brought out more and more and more, especially if it's been hidden away for a long time. Because disappointment is real.
Yeah. And even with ourselves.
Yeah.
That's important to know too, is like, how do I, whether you're a believer or not, like, how do I become the best person? Like, I have to reach this goal, like, in order to matter. And I think, especially in our day and age, that's why it is hard to trust, because we get things immediately. We see overnight successes. We think, if my timeline doesn't succumb to whatever I intend to happen, or if I don't reach where I'm supposed to go, then I don't matter.
Yeah.
That I'm at a lower level, or whatever the case or the reasoning may be. And I think that's why trust should be freeing. Trusting God should be something that we see as a privilege. And again, I'm speaking to myself here. It should be this welcoming invitation, and
like a beckoning on a journey.
Right.
Like, I have something so good for you. Will you come with me?
I mean, that's why he says, my yoke is easy. Because he's like, you don't need to take on the cares of the world. You can cast your anxieties, your hopes, and your dreams. And I know we alike are dreamers. And so it's so fun. And part of our personality, when we get excited about something, like, I'll go make a Pinterest board. Like, we just mentioned that we're kids, and I'm like, I have our future kids' outfits. I have their name. I do have their names planned. And I'm like, that's amazing if I hold it in God's hands.
Yeah.
Because, what if we picked 3 girls' names and we have 2 boys?
Yeah.
Like, it's just, I think letting our dreams be fluid and like letting them continually be checked with God. Because if the narrative's one-sided, it's, God, I wanted this. Why didn't it happen? Or if we're just sitting waiting, God's like, I want you to dream about these things. I want you to get excited, but don't do it all on your own. Like, invite me into the process. And
I feel like what you said too is such a good check for people, where if this has become a heavy burden, then what have you allowed to enter into the process, enter into the journey that doesn't belong there? Because that's not the intention of God. He compares our future to that of birds, which, side note, I saw a crane this morning. It was really bizarre, and no one saw it but me, but it was there.
Do you need to see a counselor?
I think it was like migrating. I was just like, that was a crane, like outside my door in Colorado. But birds or flowers in the field, like, these are easy, free-flowing things. And that's the type of people we're supposed to be. not that we're just loosey-goosey, but that we're not bound and held down in the same way that those who don't have Holy Spirit, that aren't walking in relationship with God, where we're like, oh, I'm taken care of. We're not supposed to look like the world in the way we hope and dream and believe. We are meant to look like something different. Like we don't have to carry this on our own because we don't.
I love that analogy. I think that's so good. Now I'm just picturing a crane.
Legit.
A big one.
It was very large. And I was like, Augie, come on, there's a crane. And he's like, no. I'm like,
thanks.
You don't even know. And then he saw a tiny bird. He's like, I saw your crane. I'm like, no. You didn't. That's not a crane.
You're like, just trust me here. We're talking about trust. I saw a crane.
I need to ask my neighbors. I'm sure one of them saw it. I think there's probably a bird watcher somewhere.
We'll take a poll after this. But I want to make sure we end this, maybe even just sharing testimonies of trust.
Yeah.
And I'd love to offer that to you of either conventional or unconventional, a story, not even a success story, because that goes back to, the trust was in the outcome. Trust isn't always in the outcome. It's in the process. So what story would you share?
Yeah. Well, I'm
sorry, I put you on the spot.
No, I'm trying to think. And I'm like, we literally, anytime we were praying about getting pregnant, we like looked at each other and I got pregnant. So that's definitely not our story. But yeah, about a year and a half ago, it was right at the beginning of COVID. And before that, if I look closely, there was a dream birthed inside of me for a very different, unconventional way of life for myself and Addison and our children. And currently we are, I cannot emphasize enough how blessed I do believe we are. But our life is more of a typical, like, suburban, the kids go to school, and all of it is wonderful. But for me, it was this birthing, this awareness of like, there's more. And so even that part of it, Christian, reconciling, like, if what I have is good, why go for anything different? And God being like, this is not my kingdom. Like, my kingdom is everybody gets their own pie. We're not splitting up pieces.
That's good.
So whatever there is on the other side of that, it became this journey of like looking for land and believing initially this was land in Colorado with some of our close friends, and we would become like a hippie commune. And that didn't play out. And then it was land in another state, and we took our kids there. I mean, we went deep into, like, God bless Addison, that he really just explored with me. We went there and went with our kids, and I'm like, it's in the middle of nowhere, and I'm really forcing it. Like, guys, wouldn't this be the best thing ever? And all of our hopes and dreams, they're like, Mom, I guess it's fine. And when you feel that, like, oh, I'm striving.
Yeah.
Like, I am clawing for this thing to happen. And then some time passed, where it just was like, none of it played out. And then the questions start coming, where you really do have to wonder, did I create this? Am I like a bored housewife who just needed some kind of a project or thing to occupy my time? Did I create this? And then out of nowhere, this new possibility for above and beyond all that I could have hoped or dreamed or imagined starts playing out. And even in the midst of that now, though, with so many question marks still at play for what could a different life look like for us. And I'm of the belief that it's never just for us. It's never just for me. It's never just for my children, but that it's always beyond that. It's always for those who are beyond. And not knowing all of the things, all of the answers, but trusting and remembering, like, this is a gift. I am beckoning you on this journey with me because I am a good God. And I want to experience these things with you. I want to be invited in. I want you daily when the confusion and the frustration and the disappointment and just the lack of control. So much of this for me comes down to I want to control the outcome, the process, the journey, because I want to be able to say, yeah, this is happening, and then this is happening, and then this. And it goes back to that being about an outside perspective, not what's happening internally between me and God. And daily, I'm having to be brought back to this place and allowing peace to be my guide, where I can slip out of that so quickly and so efficiently, where I'm like, oh gosh, no. And then I go to Addison and I'm like, why aren't you making things happen? Like, you need to make all my dreams come true and check all my boxes for me. And it has been very bad for our relationship, as you can imagine.
Well, it goes back to what you said earlier, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Like
it is. I'm like, okay, I can't see God. I can't really be like, God, you're failing me here, because that feels wrong. But I can say that to Addison. And that should feel more wrong than it does. But I'm a work in progress. So, yeah.
We're all about vulnerability here, guys.
So I don't know. I don't know if that was a very like well packaged example, but it's definitely real.
Well, it is. It shows the process, and it's not always neat. But I think the less we can make it a roller coaster ride, and like make it more of it's a small world. Like, it's not supposed to be dramatic fall.
Yeah.
And like up and down and
how much of that is actually us? We're the dramatic up and down, and God's like, it could have been easier, guys.
We could have been jamming. It's a small world right now. No, I think it's important to share stories like that. And I was even reading through Matthew earlier, and just the different accounts of where Jesus would heal people, and seeing the varying examples of people coming up to him, the amount of trust they had in him and faith in who he was, even before he revealed it, was awe-inspiring to me. And just rechecked my own faith. But then even him saying, I've healed you. And countless times he did this. I've healed you. Now, don't go tell everyone you know. And they would always go and tell everyone you know, which I think if I was talking to Jesus, I'd be like, yes, sir. Okay. I won't mess this up. You just healed me.
Like, whatever you take say. It away.
Right. I'm just like, can I please keep my feet that work now? I can walk. But just even that of like the fear of man concept that comes into our journey with God, like, how often should we either put that out there without expectation or just keep it to ourselves?
Yeah.
Like we post everything the second we get an announcement. We do all this stuff, and it's like, again, what you're saying. It's exciting. We're supposed to do life in community, but is our expectation supposed to flow on what other people say or if other people know? Yeah. Because I know we've been walking through something, and it's been like on and off and on and off, and even in hindsight, it's easy to see we had peace here. We didn't have peace here.
Yeah.
And that has led us, even when there were moments of like, maybe we feel peace. Like, let's just kind of roll up our sleeves and go with it. No, that's not what we're supposed to do. But we got to this place of really thinking something was confirmed. And I was like, I want to tell everybody. But what if? What if it falls through? Yeah. And like, I have to say I was wrong. And so even in that, walking through it has been exciting to take that excitement back and just share it with God and my husband, of course, but intimately with God. And I've been listening to Gratitude by Brandon Lake. I think Lake. I'm sorry if you're watching, Brandon.
He definitely is.
He is.
Sorry,
he's like,
Brandon.
I'm getting something from this podcast. I'm going to write a song about it. But I've just been listening to it because it's just talking about gratitude and even telling your soul to reawaken to what gratitude is. And Arden's probably heard it at least 20 times this week. But honestly, about 15 minutes before we started this podcast, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take time to myself while everyone's setting up in the podcast room and play this song. And then I played that song and got a confirmation of something on my phone. And I'm just like, that's all it is. Yeah. If we boil this down, trust in God is just trusting in who he is. Yeah. Not what he's going to do, not what our life is going to look like, but I can trust that who God says he is. And I can just be happy. I can just be grateful no matter what happens, that we are children of God. We do get to walk with him. Like you were saying earlier, we just know that we're taken care of. We have that Holy Spirit peace.
Yeah.
So
we are cranes.
We are cranes. Watch us fly. Or don't if you don't trust us.
I love that, Christian.
I'd love for you just to say a word to everyone to encourage them as we close.
Yeah. I think take heart. You know, He is a good God. He is a good Father. He can be trusted.
Well, guys, I hope you got something from this podcast, and we know that this is an ongoing conversation. So if this podcast sparks questions in your mind, sparks conversation points, we want you to comment, let us know. We want this to be a continual journey together. And if you do like what you hear, leave a like, subscribe, tell your friends, retweet all the things, and let us know how we can even best be serving you through this podcast. Until next time.